Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, boxing fans around the world. Let's do a quick weekend update, catch up on what's been happening with the fights. And I covered many of them. And I already talked about one of them, mostly the one that I felt was most worth the time and attention. But let me go ahead and talk about some of the rest of them, some of the things that's happened here. At the top of the list here, we had Artur Beterbiev, as I pronounce him, and Marcus Brown. And I'm fairly certain I said that I didn't see Marcus Brown being able to win. Not that I didn't think Marcus Brown's a solid fighter, but just that I felt Beterbiev would be too much, and that's what we saw. Now, of course, anybody who is talking about this fight remembers very clearly when Marcus Brown fought Vito Jack, and there was a very bad headbutt, a very bad gash, probably the worst I've seen on Vito Jack. And then, in this fight, the same thing happened. There was a headbutt early, gashed open Beterbiev, and they're bleeding all over creation. The rest a bloody mess. Beterbiev's a bloody mess. Brown was a bloody mess. But Beterbiev, it seemed like he didn't let it phase him too much. He might have been more frustrated than anything else, but he didn't let it phase him. And eventually he got the stoppage when Marcus Brown essentially quit, stayed down for a 10 count on a knee. And that's kind of the outcome I expected, was another stoppage, just because Beterbiev is a very dangerous fighter, no matter what anybody says. And most people don't rate him as a fighter boxer, but he's a strong, dangerous opponent. It's kind of what I've always thought of him. Now, unfortunately, places like NSB and others are going kind of overboard, talking about how Beterbiev destroys Canelo, and we need to pump the brakes a little bit. Everybody that Beterbiev has been in there with that he's destroyed have been guys who come straight after him, have been guys that fight his fight and eventually get drawn into a war. Canelo Alvarez is not going to get drawn into a war, because when he did against Golovkin, he darn near lost. He's not going to do that against Beterbiev, because he knows that doing that against Beterbiev is going to be a very dangerous choice. And I don't see Canelo Alvarez, unless he sees that the opponent is undersized compared to him, is going to do that. Now, one thing others have talked about is that Beterbiev appears to be a weight bully. I don't see that. I mean, yes, some of the guys are a little bit undersized, but generally speaking, he's fought guys that were very close to his size, and I don't see him as a weight bully at all. To me, he's legit as far as his strength, his power, and his durability, and his ability, and his tenacity. Right, he's hungry, and that's all legit. All I'm saying, all I've ever been saying, is we need to pump the brakes on this guy beats Canelo just because he had a great showing against a B-level fighter. That's all I'm saying. We got to stop that. I know Canelo's the top dog. I know he's the number one. Everybody's gunning for him. But there are levels to it. And I think the unfortunate truth is that Beterbiev, he's an older guy. I believe he's 37 years old now. And if Canelo gets in there and schools him, places like NSB will just say, okay, well, Beterbiev was old. He aged him out. He waited too long. Same old deep, deep, deep. And I kind of, I wash it out, one ear versus the other. But it was a good win. I'm not discrediting the win. It was a good performance from a very strong, very difficult level of opposition in front of him, because Brown was there to try. He tried, at least in the first parts. It's just that, Beterbiev was going to be too much, and that's what I figured was going to happen. And then the next fight up was one that I really wasn't looking forward to, because I suspected it would go the way that it went, which was Parker against Chisora. And of course, Parker gets the W. Now, here's what I knew was going to happen. This fight went close, and it shouldn't have been close, but it was close just because Parker early on just didn't show up. He got dropped in the very first round, and then he had to kind of show up because he was behind. He was coming from behind. And then eventually he's able to drop Chisora in return to kind of catch up and get back. But, there's something about Parker that drives me nuts as a heavyweight. He doesn't seem to have that killer instinct, and I'm not sure why he's in the business, because he's not a closer, and he seems to make silly mistakes early, and that's what I figured would happen. And Chisora is older. He's very battle tested. He's been in absolute wars his career. So to see it go this close, Parker almost lost. I mean, to see it go this close is a joke to me. They only gave him 7 rounds of the fight. And it's not that Parker wasn't stylistically good. It's just that he doesn't go all in. He doesn't do everything he can in order to get this guy out of his face. And I'm not sure why. I just don't know what it is. Now, the truth is, everybody struggles with their Chisora, and there's no real clear reason why that is, but everybody seems to struggle with this guy. and his style. And yes, he's an awkward fighter, but at some point with his age and the wars, I would assume that he would eventually not, somebody would just blow him out the water. And I would love to see Wilder fight the guy at some point. I doubt it happens, but I think that would be a fan-friendly fight with two guys who know how to promote a fight. But Derek Chisora really doesn't want to fight overseas from where he's at. He kind of likes to be international. He doesn't want to fight in the U.S., and Wilder's certainly not going to go international. I don't think he's ever been international. If he has, it was early in his career. So he doesn't seem to want to, neither guy really wants to step out of their comfort zone to, get the big fights and do that. So I don't know what that's all about. That's for today in what's going on. So Parker Chisora was one of on DAZN, and of course that's Manchester Arena. That's why it already took place. We still have Morrell versus Atlantis Fox. That's supposed to happen sometime this afternoon, about an hour and a half away from now on Fox Sports. And then Zurdo Ramirez versus Milnicki Gonzalez is still supposed to be happening today. That's in Texas, so I assume it's going to happen roughly around probably 6 or 7 p.m. So for me, that would be 2.5 hours to 3 hours away is my guess. And then, of course, you got Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley, the rematch, happening out in Florida, the Amalie Arena. That one's happening in 2.5 hours on Showtime. And I did unfortunately configure, and I can't explain it to you, but it is what it is. I did confirm that it is a pay-per-view, and I truly do not know why it's a pay-per-view, but it's pay-per-view. It is what it is. So there's still more fights happening today and then, they're decent fights. I wouldn't say they're great fights. Pretty much the one that was the headliner has already happened, the true headliner, that being Joseph Parker and Derek Chisora as far as the international crowd. And then as far as the domestic crowd in the United States, I think Jake Paul and Tyron Woodley is the one that's worth it. The fact that it's pay-per-view means that not many people are going to see it, unfortunately. And then if you are a boxing fan in general, I do believe that Zurdo Ramirez is worth watching. I don't rate his opponent. However, Zurdo Ramirez, the fighter himself, I think is a really good, strong prospect level fighter that's coming up and doing some good things. I'm not going to rate David Morrell and Atlantis Fox just because whatever. I'm sorry, but I don't rate the Fox brothers, quote unquote. And then just to kind of wrap up what we've got coming up next weekend, which I'll do more coverage in depth probably on Friday, because Friday will be Christmas Eve. For me, that doesn't really mean much, but for you, hopefully that means you're spending time with your family and you're having a great time, enjoying the holidays. You got some time off. You're not forced to work and so on. But just to kind of summarize what we've got on deck for next weekend, there are not very many fights that are scheduled as of right now because of course, it is a weekend. So what they did is they put one fight that I can find. It's a welterweight fight, Vito Milnicki versus Nick Lamomba. Vito Milnicki, I'm aware of. He's one of those up-and-coming guys as well. Nick Lamomba, I haven't heard anything about. I will do coverage on him on Friday, the 24th, as I evaluate the welterweight contest. And what I'm looking for out of the welterweights are the next generation of the welterweight division, because the welterweight division is on a steady decline. It started roughly with the departure of guys like Sugar Shane Mosley, guys like Ruslan Provodnikov, guys like Oscar De La Hoya, and so on. And you still have, at the time, guys like Floyd and Manny kind of holding up the division, and then Tim Bradley shows up, and then Keith Thurman's here, and Danny Garcia's here. But then Danny Garcia was fresh off 140. He's not as successful at 147 as he was in 140. You got Sean Porter in the mix, and he's basically holding the division up on his back. And of course, Sean Porter retired after losing to Bud Crawford. So now you got Keith Thurman, who I don't know what's going on with him. Either he's sitting out injured or he's just done with the business of boxing after one loss to Manny Pacquiao. Manny, of course, is retired. You got Yordenis Ugas, who is stuck in a mandatory against Stanionis. And then you got Errol Spence, and nobody knows what his health and his physical state of being are, much less his mental state of being. The last time Errol Spence was in the ring, it was a dominant victory over Danny Swift Garcia. Danny Swift Garcia, of course, is moving up to 154, according to what he said, and chasing titles there. Errol Spence has said on repeated occasions that he wants to unify 147 and then move up to 154. With Terence Bud Crawford now being an independent, allegedly, it means it opens up the door for that fight to happen. However, Errol Spence now has a little bit of an uncertainty with the mandatory because, of course, Abdukakarov took a dominant loss most recently with the mandatory that he had. So then he no longer is mandatory. So now we have to look at who's going to be the mandatory for IBF. Terence Crawford, as far as what I'm told, was lobbying the IBF to become the mandatory for Errol Spence so they could force the fight and then start doing a unification. The problem is that there's not really much precedent for that because generally speaking, the various belt orgs do not recognize another belt holder in their rankings, and very infrequently have they made a belt holder the mandatory for another belt. It just doesn't happen in the business. So Errol Spence has a little bit of strength in who he can choose to fight, but he's running out of options because Sean Porter was, before he retired, the mandatory for the WBC, so he's out. Danny Swift is gone to 154. You got Virgil Ortiz, who holds the WBA gold that entitles him to a WBA shot, but he has to wait for Yordenis Ugas and Stanionis. Spence wanted to fight Ugas, but of course, Ugas is stuck in the tournament, so Ugas is out, so he can't unify WBA. We don't know what the situation is with the mandatory. On Friday, I will go and refresh on the rankings and see where we're at and see if the guy that beat Abdukakarov was going to take over the mandatory. I doubt it. Chances are they're going to choose somebody else, probably somebody like Virgil Ortiz, because Virgil Ortiz's title isn't really a belt, so they might consider ranking him there. The other thing that's possible, and I hope doesn't happen, is that they start ranking Keith Thurman for IBF or WBC to get Keith back in the mix, or if Keith lobbies for such. Something tells me we're not going to see Spence versus Crawford as the next fight, and I suspect that Spence really wants to fight somebody else first. And ideally, he wanted to fight Ugas, but we see what happened there. So the welterweight division is kind of in a limbo land. As it stands, you've got older guys. Ugas is older. Keith is getting up there. Bud's getting up there. Spence is getting up there. So you got older guys. Then you got the younger guys who are still around there. The Staniotis of the world, Jaron Boots Ennis of the world, and others that are coming up, Virgil Ortiz. You got Blair the Flare Cobbs. He's kind of floating around out there. You got Conor Benn, who wants to campaign there. You still got Adrian Broner, who's not fully old, but he has name recognition. So the welterweight division is kind of on, I don't want to say it's running on empty. Running on. But it just seems like its pulse is slowly going out, and that's sad to see because, of course, the welterweight division has been a staple of boxing for a while, but it seems like the higher weight classes are starting to take back over and become the draws that they used to be, mostly spearheaded by guys still like Anthony Joshua, now guys like Usyk, guys like Fury, guys like Wilder. The sad part is that, Fury's older, he's getting older, he's not any younger. Wilder's talking about retirement. Usyk isn't really a true heavyweight. He has boxing skill, but if you had a true heavyweight get in front of him, that's going to wash him. But Joshua's too tentative as a fighter now because of what happened to Andy Ruiz. And of course, Andy Ruiz is still in the mix and he's not too old. So the heavyweight division's got some smoke that needs to be resolved. But I've always been focused on the welterweight division because of the power of the guys to broadcast and advertise themselves and sell the fight and actually get in there and do it. Now what you're seeing is like the super flyweight division is starting to get really hot. You still got Srisaket Sorongvizai, he's out there. You got Chocolatito, he's still out there. You got Estrada, he's still out there. Ancajas, he's still out there. Quadras, he's still out there. And so now this becomes that key division where these guys are really fighting each other. Each and every one of them has fought each other at least once, which is very exciting. And they always bring it every single time. They're not boring fighters. People trash them because of their size, but for me as a boxing fan, as long as you're going out there and you're trying to entertain me, I'm going to support you. That's why I support guys like Deontay Wilder because he tries. I don't support somebody like a freaking Frank Sanchez who does everything in his power not to hit the opponent as a heavyweight. It's different when you're a welterweight. As a welterweight, I don't expect you to go out there like a slugger, like a Ruslan Provodnikov did. I expect you to box smart and avoid and hit and not be hit because you're a smaller weight. You still have room to go up, and you should be preserving your health. When you're already at the heavyweight division, what are you preserving? You're already at the top as far as weight class. I'd rather see you just go in there and try to get the guy out of there. So the divisions now keep shifting. It used to be for a long time that welterweight was kind of the place to go, right? And then that shifted, and then heavyweight started to come up when you got Tyson in the mix, and then it shifted again. And then you got middleweight and super middleweight getting in the mix, with guys like Eubank, guys like Nigel Benn, guys like Steve Collins, guys like Joe Calslappy, and so on. And then it keeps shifting. Like certain divisions and certain weight classes all kind of take a seat and kind of move. So I'm intrigued to see this welterweight fight to see if there are more guys coming into welterweight that may shake things up. And I would love to get back to covering that one because all of the guys involved are supposed to be having fights early next year. We're going to see what that looks like, including guys like Khan and Brooke, who I believe are on the way out the door. And then on the last part, with the new year, there are a lot of fights that have been delayed because of COVID during the latter part of the year. And of course, Christmas is here and so on, and travel's a little bit difficult. But there are a lot of big fights coming up on the horizon. You got Luis Ortiz. He's back in the mix. He's going to be fighting Prince Charles Martin. That's a very exciting fight for one reason. Luis Ortiz is believed to be old and on the way out the door. However, he has everybody who he fights has problems with it. And Deontay Wilder to date is the only one to have beaten him and made him, get him out of there. Prince Charles Martin, I argue he quit against Anthony Joshua. I don't rate him as a fighter, but when you match him up against somebody like Luis Ortiz, you got really two stylistically decently good boxers. So that one's a fight I think worth watching. That's on the 1st of January, at least right now, on Fox Sports. I definitely want to see that one. Joe Smith versus Callum Johnson. This is for the light heavyweight title. This one's worth watching on the 15th on ESPN because the winner of this fight might end up fighting Canelo Alvarez at some point. Of the two of them, I'm not going to make a call today. Once we get to that weekend, I'll do extensive coverage about that one, but I think it'll be worth to watch. Chris Eubank Jr. versus Liam Williams. Of course, Chris Eubank Jr. is a name. That's really what he is because every time he's stepped up, he's failed. So he's a brand. He's a name. He doesn't really want to go out of his comfort as far as fighting overseas. And he's fighting decent fighters, but every time he steps up, he seems to take a loss. And I don't know what that's about because I would love to rate him as a fighter, but there's just something about him falls off. Jose Ramirez and Jose Pedraza. That's a really exciting fight as well. Khan and Brooke is well past the sell date. You can just watch these guys right off in the sunset, and then Josh Taylor versus Jack Catterall for unified supremacy at junior welterweight. And Josh Taylor is another one. I think he's a stylistically good fighter, but he's being overhyped at places like NSD and others. And so seeing a fight like that's great, but it's he's talking about going to 147 as Josh Taylor. He was trying to chase Terence Crawford. Terence Crawford's chasing Errol Spence. But if Josh Taylor goes to 147, I don't think he looks anywhere near as good as he does at 140. 140's just had challenges with the level of competition for years. Because remember, you used to have Amir Khan as the unified champion, the man. He was the lineal champion at 140. Danny Swift fights him at 140, sparks him out in 4 rounds. And the division's not been the same since. So it seems like 140's always been a weak division, generally speaking, which is why I don't give credit to certain guys like Crawford who unify 140 because it seems like it's easier to unify 140 for whatever reason than any other division. Like welterweight, even welterweight has had a very difficult time unifying. The last one to actually do it to anywhere near full, and even then it wasn't 100%, was Floyd Mayweather back in 2015 after he beat Manny Pacquiao. But even then, I think he was still down 1 belt. He certainly didn't have the IBO. And so it's like, for whatever reason, certain divisions are harder to unify than other divisions. I don't buy this theory that it's all about Top Rank and Bob Arum or PBC and Al Heyman or Eddie Hearn or any of this. I don't believe it. I think what's happening is just there's certain divisions, the quality of opposition is superior to other divisions. Thus, I look at the divisions where it's harder to unify as the ones to really watch and pay attention to. So we're going to see a lot of fights in these various divisions and a lot of fighters show up, some of them younger, some of them older. But it's going to tell us a lot about what the future holds for the sport of boxing because, again, a lot of the big names are on the way out or already gone. And so newer guys are the ones we have to start paying attention to and see who the next crop of superstars in boxing are really going to be. So I'm really excited. Today, like I said, coming up here soon, keep an eye out for Jake Paul, Tyron Woodley. Again, because it's a pay-per-view, I can't really support that. I don't believe it's a pay-per-view level fight, but it's at cruiserweight. And if you are a boxing fan, you already have you have money out your ears, I think that's worth fighting. It's on Showtime. Or if you're in the Tampa, Florida area and you want to go to the Amalie Arena, that's of course an option you could do. But it's up to you if you want to do it. I think the outcome is telling as to where Jake Paul is. Is he really a contender at cruiserweight? Can we really count that he's going to keep going? Is he a strong fighter? Was it a fluke? There's a lot of unanswered questions there I think are worth answers. And then Zurdo Ramirez and Yuniskin Gonzalez, some point today, has not had a time. If you have DAZN, it may tell you on the app, I refuse to subscribe to DAZN for ethical reasons. So that's what I got for you today. Like I said, Joseph Parker dominates Derek Chisora over 12, goes the distance. Parker goes close. Parker got dropped early, just like I suspected would happen. Derek Chisora, once again, has made his opponent look really bad, and I suspect he's going to keep on fighting, despite the fact that he's not been able to make it happen so far.